years ago, my husband Rick and I travelled to Europe for the first time. We left our 3 children at home in the care of their grandparents. And due to the time difference, we used an app to stay connected. The app allowed us to leave voice messages. And it was lovely because we could hear each other's voices and tell much bigger stories than a short text message can hold. On the morning of our 20th wedding anniversary, Rick and I woke up in a beautiful hotel room in the shadow of the Eiffel Tower, and we opened up the app. Message 1 from Joe, 16, the eldest. Imagine a serious but dibber-dobber voice. Hey Mum, hey Dad, don't worry, everything is all right. But Sam was jumping on the couch and he put his bum through the wall. Next came my mum's message. Hi, Charl. I'm sorry that Joe left you that message. Everything is fine here, and he shouldn't have worried you on your special day. Sam is all good, and there is no major damage. Next comes another story from Joe. This time, he begins with a sheepish tone, but he reverts to dibber-dobber quite quickly. Hey Mum, hey Dad, I'm really sorry if I worried you. But Nanny told Sam not to jump on the couch. He disobeyed her, and now there is a bumhole in the wall. I thought it was better if you knew now. The next message comes from the accused. Sam. He is 9 and a little man of very few words. His voice sounds tiny and really worried. Hey, I'm so sorry about the bumhole in the wall. I didn't mean to do it. It was just an accident. Joe says that I'm in a lot of trouble. Finally, our last message. We get Sarah, 13, bright and cheery. Happy anniversary, Mum and Dad. I love you. And I hope you're having the best day. Ignore the boys. Nanny and I have everything under control. That day, we walked for miles through the hallowed halls of the Louvre, gazing at priceless works of art. And yet, it was that image of a little bum pressed into gyprock, half a world away, that left a much deeper impression on our family history. My children are grown now. Joe is 26, Sarah is 23, and Sam is a not-so-little 19. The context has changed, but the history remains. The story of the bumhole is firmly embedded in our family archive. It tells a sliver of our history, of us. Would it surprise you to hear that I've taken a few liberties in telling it? that I've changed a few words, taken some dramatic license? What genre have I told you that story in? In literature, genre matters because genre wields power over meaning. Depending on the genre of the book you're reading, you will expect different conventions to be present. If you're reading crime fiction, you will expect a crime to happen early on. Clues to be sprinkled throughout the story, perhaps a red herring or two, with a big reveal at the end. That's genre at work. If you are reading a romance novel, you will expect entirely different conventions. You will expect a meet-cute between a potential couple, some obstacles for that couple to overcome, with some form of reconciliation for the couple at the end. They're some of the conventions of romance genre. And genre constructs meaning through the reader's expectations of the story. What about history genre? Does that genre work differently because it's non-fiction? Is it non-fiction? There is a heavier weight to history genre because its defining convention is an expectation that it is true. I wonder, what picture have you formed of my family from the history story that I've just told you? And what would happen to that picture in your mind if I told you that it never actually happened, I just made it up to illustrate a point? Or that in fact it did happen, but instead of acknowledging that I wasn't even on the same continent when it happened, I told you the story as if I were present, an eyewitness. Would that change the credibility you give to me as the storyteller in some way? Should Sam get to be the only narrator of that story? What happens when we tell someone else's story and use a genre that wields the power of truth? As an Australian Indigenous person from the Bundjalung mob, history is a difficult genre for me. His story. My first question is, where is her story? The next question I have is, where is our story? I'm holding a history book in my hands. A history book that stands in for many history books written post-1770. Sir Ernest Scott was an Australian historian and a professor of history at the University of Melbourne. And he, and many others like him, shaped the world's understanding of Australia and the hundreds of people, nations, and languages that filled this continent. And yet, his opening words in 1916 are, "This short history of Australia begins with a blank space on the map." The British saw a blank space on a map waiting to be filled. And they used their language of gap and deficit to tell our stories. Ernest Scott and many others like him took 60,000 years of history of our stories, and in their power-wielding genre, declared our stories erased, null, irrelevant. At that exact moment that Ernest Scott published his book, my great-grandfather, Bundjalung man William Olive, was deep in the trenches of the Western Front, serving Australia in World War I. What would his voice message have added to the blank space story? Of course, we'll never know. Nobody ever asked him. In fact, upon his return from the war in 1919, the only way he could access the freedoms that he'd fought for was if he surrendered his land, his language, his cultural practices, and his ties to family by formally signing an exemption certificate. Otherwise, he was subject to Protection Acts, which got to control and decide his every move, thereby writing a brand new story for the generations to come. What genre has Australia really used to tell her stories? Our stories. I invite you to think back to Rick and I, in our lovely hotel bed, laughing until our sides ached, completely immersed in an unfolding story happening half a world away in our own family home, pieced together by fragments of sentences told in 4 voices. Did we think that we had the full story of the bumhole? Did any one of those 4 voice messages cancel out the truth of any one of the other voice messages? Did you feel threatened by one of the voices in our story? Little Sam did. But even in his fear, he knew that in our family, he had the power to add his voice to our story. Over the years, Rick and I have swooped in and we have added our voices to this story, always acknowledging our distance, never claiming ownership over a story that does not only belong to us. Would you agree that our bumhole history is best told with all our voices? Imagine the stories we could tell. Thank you.